You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful you can take to yours. On the show today, we discussed spellcasting. Hello there, sages and adventurers, and mostly sages for this one. My name is Jody, and with me, as always, my good friend and GM colleague who is fighting through some spring allergies. How you hanging in, my friend?
I'm doing fine. Man, yeah, this...
It's an NPC for my past shows up too.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, just the guy with allergies. A great. By the way, here's a freebie at the top of the show. Your free NPC voice for the day. Guy with allergies.
Let's do it. Yeah,
it's perfect.
It's great.
I'm doing well. Hopefully, my voice isn't too messed up.
We'll see how it goes
easily.
as we go. All right. But yesterday you ran a session, and today's episode is going to focus on Shadowdark's spell casting mechanics. Now, you and I have not actually had a chance to discuss this episode or this session you just ran at all. So we're also doing a little real-time audit on the show today, as I was not a player in this one. So Matt, tell us about this session you ran yesterday and maybe a little bit of why it highlighted these spell casting mechanics of Shadowdark.
Oh, I'd love to take you to the table, Jody, with a little bit of set dressing and a little bit of context. So I have been running Barrow Maze off and on, consistently for at least a year, but off and on for almost 2 years during our once-a-month Sunday games, which we've added another session because there was so much demand. So over the course of those 2 years of the Barrow Maze being a dungeon that characters could go to, several mummies have been released from sarcophagi, and they have been, because mummies in Shadowdark are bananas, they have been run away from and have been left to roam the halls. And I have been slowly but surely between sessions figuring out randomly if these mummies ever found each other. And yesterday, things really got away from the characters. They're in a long hallway. There are doors to the north just lining this like 70-foot long hallway. And they are all mausoleums. And they had heard a rumor. In fact, they had verified that a rumor was true, that somewhere in one of these mausoleums, there was a member of an adventuring party that had unleashed a mummy. And that dead adventurer was a wizard with a spell book full of potentially very valuable spells. They had gone through several rooms of the dungeon, and they're now exploring this mausoleum. They find this crypt with the wizard. They find the spell book. Incredible. They found quite a few worthy treasures. And then the crawling clock went to 0. I rolled a random encounter, and I rolled a result that I interpreted and had previously, I was sort of looking for a result that would signal to me that the mummies were going to show up. And on a D100 table in the tomb section, I can't remember exactly what I rolled, but it signaled to me that mummies were about ready to come a-knockin'. And so they did. And this long corridor, while it's filled with doors, all those doors are locked. And they know that they don't really go anywhere. And the only way out they know for sure is through these mummies that are now coming through the corridor. I rolled the D6 to figure out how far away they were when the random encounter started. They were near 30 feet away. Very bad. They hear the mummies, and the wizard gets a single advantaged lightning bolt off. And then all hell broke loose. The end result was that a level 8 fighter was killed by the mummy's rot touch. Same with a level 4 priest. And they met their demise in an incredible an incredible combat that featured an egg of the cockatrice being used, a mummy being turned to stone, characters going to 0 hit points, coming back with only a couple of hit points, going back down, death timers going to 0, and then finally the wizard having to make a decision about whether or not he wanted to try and stabilize one of the characters or cast Lightning Bolt again, thereby perhaps evading and avoiding a TPK, but condemning the 2 other characters to death. And he chose the Lightning Bolt.
Whoa, spicy one. Yeah, the Cliff Notes version you sent me via text last night did not paint the picture to that degree. Holy cow. First off, I'm going to, level 8 character going down. My goodness.
Pour one out for Yuri.
Yeah, brother Yuri.
Alas. One of, I think the highest level character that has ever died in any of the Shadowdark games that I have run. And a stalwart of both of our tables, actually, has played in both of our games.
Yeah. And then the level 4 cleric who has had a checkered and storied past and will not find satisfaction.
Failed once again for the second time. Failed with a natural 2. Cure wounds at the worst possible time. And had up until that point, as we've talked about, I think on this very program, had hit every single spell. We're talking like 14s on the die, 15s on the die, just crushing every spell roll, and then boom, right when it matters, natural 2, no luck tokens on the board, and I mean the table went silent.
That poor elven priest, and alas that they finally find their demise, and just, man, consistent as could be, except not great under pressure.
And look, this is actually where I want to start, because spellcasting, I mean, this episode, like, there's so much in this encounter that I wanted to tease out, but there have been conversations about spellcasting on the Discord recently that I thought this might be a good way to kind of engage with those. But also, there were a couple of conversations that happened after the session that I wanted to kind of dive into and get your thoughts on. Specific spells that they were talking about. Oh, I should have used this. I should have done this. Which is always, I mean, that's always kind of what you want, right? You want the session to be the topic of conversation when it ends. But I want to talk about spellcasting because, and it was just so visceral. Like, the roll to cast mechanic in Shadowdark can be so punishing, but it can also be so poetic. And much like any other die roll, I just love it. And in this moment, this failure to cast Cure Wounds, and Jax, the wizard, having to decide whether or not to cast a spell that he has advantage on. This tier 3 lightning bolt, it's got advantage, pretty consistent. I mean, having to choose between that and a DC 15 stabilized check, like, he's got a good intelligence.
Right.
So we're talking about some really wonderful meeting of stats and or statistics and narrative. And I don't know, I just love that. So
what I heard there that I want to jump in and start on is that high stakes casting role, which from my experience is the internet discussion around Shadowdark's casting mechanics of roll to cast, and until you fail, you can just keep casting the spell. Is the discussion is always around, but what if I fail to cast all my spells and it's so risky and then I don't get to do anything? And what I'm hearing is you had these really high stakes decisions and roles in this moment, and I don't know. I just go, isn't that what we want though? Isn't that what you want?
Yeah.
Is that somebody picks up that D20 and goes, okay, I'm going to cast Cure Wounds, and everybody understands, like, hey, if our priest blows it right now or doesn't make the roll, things are going to get out of hand fast. Like this, everybody's watching this D20 tumble to its resting point, and you have those Stranger Thing moments where everybody cheers and that, or everybody goes, oh no, oh my gosh, and yeah. So I mean, I'm sure there were mundane moments of, I cast this spell, I cast that spell, and on we go. Especially with somebody having advantage. I assume due to a feat, he's gained advantage.
Yeah, due to one of the talent rolls that this wizard rolled. Yeah, dude, I want to just say this for the record, that it's not that I don't understand the folks who who are frustrated about spellcasting, especially because there's been a large tranche of people come into Shadowdark lately and over the last year after the Kickstarter has fulfilled and the reviews came in and the Ennies and now the second Kickstarter, right? Like there's been a lot of people coming to Shadowdark and it's wonderful. But that also means that folks are starting at first level. And so it means we have a large population of people. Our kind of distribution of character levels in the wider Shadowdark Pantheon is really bottom heavy at like first level and second level. That's for a couple of reasons. Characters are less likely to make it to higher levels.
Yeah, death is still on the table when you're 8th level, apparently.
But it's also just the simple fact that you got to start somewhere, and most people are going to start at level 1. So I understand when people say like, but one of my players failed to cast every one of their spells, and they were frustrated. And my response to that is always, that sucks. It's statistically improbable. And if you just play a lot of Shadowdark, that curve smooths out to a point where it becomes an anomaly. And I don't know. That's where I'm at.
I have yet to see this play out in real life. I have seen wizards get to, you have no more spells. I've seen that happen a handful of times. And I've loved it. And in a positive sense of tension, I can say the table has loved it. I mean, they much rather would have been zinging out fireballs and lightning bolts, but it created, again, a really cool dramatic moment of like, hey, we are starting to run out of spells, is a conversation that still happens and has happened with pretty stable regularity. In fact, that's one of the built-in timers of how do we know this session is reaching its natural apex. Seeing somebody just fail to cast on the day, I have not experienced that firsthand, and I think we did have it happen at one Saturday or Sunday here.
Yeah, I think we've seen it.
Possible, again, statistically unlikely. And my goodness, once you get past really level 3, those wizards are, if we're talking about wizards, they are spoiled for choice. Like you have enough spells at that point that you should not be cooking through all of them, and you have some utility still. And yeah, it is, it's one of those, I hear it and I get it. And I even like some of the alternate mechanics that maybe we can talk about a little bit later that people have proposed. But I feel like this is one of those like, man, give it some breathing room, some room to play out, and some legs at the table to see how it actually works before you start changing this one. And I'm somebody who loves to change rules and hack on things. I'm not anti-homebrew by any stretch. If you've listened to us at all, you know that. So what would you say if you were going to zoom in on your session to take it back to the table? Was it that Cure Wounds roll, or was it that last lightning bolt? Which one kind of prompted you to want to talk today? Take us to the one example that you're like, man, that's the one that I wanted to chew on, or maybe that the players were chewing on.
So the Cure Wounds is the most dramatic. I think the interesting one, and this actually might get into like the spells themselves, is Jax, our dwarf wizard, cast that lightning bolt that to basically set things off, because the mummies were cruising down the hallway, but they had a moment to react, right? And as soon as Jack's like, I cast a fire, I was like, okay, well, I cast lightning bolt. That's combat. Like we're now in combat situation rounds. It's an initiative situation. Let's go. So what happened after the game was that he said, man, I should have cast web. And I kind of wanted to talk about the difference between different kinds of spells in Shadowdark and some of the mechanics kind of baked into spellcasting, because web is a tier 2 wizard spell. It lasts for 5 rounds. It's not focus. You can cast it a far distance, and it creates a near-sized cube, so approximately 30 feet, cubed, dense spider web within the spell's range. A character stuck in the web can't move and must succeed on a strength check versus your spellcasting check to free itself. So what web does is it basically, at least in the way that we've ruled it, it basically eats a turn of action economy in terms of the you can't attack and also get out of a web. So if he would have cast web, then presumably it would have bought them around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is very interesting because I don't know how it would have played out, but web in particular represents one of those spells that I think, and we've talked about this in the past, that like establishing how you rule it is really important. Because if you establish that getting out of a web is a multitask and you can just kind of do it and then take an action, that is so much different than spending your whole turn trying to get out of the web and then only being able to move.
I think that's so important. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about with Shadowdark is that notion of, hey, GM, how are you going to rule this? Because the description of web says that a creature stuck in the web can't move and must succeed on a strength check versus your spellcasting check to free itself. Is that check taking up their action? Is that check in any way affecting their turn? If a character were stuck in a web, would they breaking free from the web in any way impact their turn other than making that roll? And I think it's really important. I'm going to give this as just kind of a framework, because it's important as a GM. I think whenever I have to make these calls, what I do is I flip the paradigm, right? I don't think about how is this going to affect a monster. I go, if a player character were in the same situation, how would it affect them? Okay, that ruling should swing both ways, the same. And my goodness, I absolutely agree that this web is unique. And not only is it a change the paradigm of a combat encounter, or could be a social encounter. I mean, you're running around in a town and there's a chase scene and you blast a web into the middle of town. It's a big area.
Yeah.
It's not small. And that was something I remember from an old game a while back. One of our wizards was casting web a whole bunch in a relatively tight space. And after the combat, we were talking through it and I was like, I noticed the webs kind of faded away because we didn't really have markers for them.
Yeah, I still regret this. I mean, I don't regret it.
Well,
but
it kept us alive, so I was stoked on
Yeah,
it. But
yeah.
it was like, hey, there should have been.
Yeah,
We should have been hosed.
Okay.
Like as the party,
Yes.
eventually we should have been hosed. And again, it's that there is not a prescribed way to work through this series of mechanics or these calls that are like check mark, check mark, check mark. And I mean, if I zoom out, because this is always kind of my thought process, is I'm going to zoom way, way out. We're talking about magic, right? Like we're talking about spells and summoning ethereal webs out of the nothingness from arcane energies. And so the answer of, well, logically, it would, well, let's pump our brakes on the logically it would.
Yeah. But then
So where do you hang your hat as a GM to make these calls is the interesting bit that gives us something to talk about into our microphones.
Well, so here's why I rule that it requires an action. And that is because it takes a die roll. There have been a number of FAQs, either by the community or Kelsey, I can't remember. If I can remember, I'll cite it in the show notes, that if a class or ancestry ability requires a die roll, then it takes an action. So the classic question that comes up on the Discord is the halfling stealthy ability. Once per day, you can become invisible for 3 rounds. Does that take an action? And generally speaking, the kind of broad consensus is no. But if you use a class ability or what have you that requires an action, some of them are very clear. Backstab, for instance, requires an attack. But if it requires a roll, it takes your action. And that's how I would apply. That's what the logic I would apply to web, and that keeps it reasonably consistent. But I think the other thing that you kind of brought up is it lasts for 5 rounds, right? I forgot, and I just kind of let the webs fall away.
It was also a combat with like 6 players and like I think as many combatants, and the combatants had this really weird special effect of a gem, and there was a lot going on.
It was pretty crazy and chaotic, but Web lasts for 5 rounds. There is no mechanic in Shadowdark to dispel magic aside from that spell, right? Like you can't get rid of a spell that is in focus by any other means except for just waiting it out. I mean, you can fail a focus check, but you can't, as far as I know, choose to fail your focus check unless, of course, you're making rulings as the GM, and we encourage that. But Dispel Magic is the only spell that allows you to end a spell. And so Web has a bit of a downside built into it that I don't actually think I leverage enough, and that actually would have been pretty interesting had they had a web that the mummies got through. Because now if they want to run away through this corridor that is the only way they think that they can get out, they're going to have to spend an action, and the mummies can come.
Right.
It does have some built-in quote unquote balance to it. It is still an unbelievably infuriating spell sometimes when it is cast in situations where I would just rather I want the monsters to be able to attack them.
It is a no fun spell for monsters in a dungeon. It is because you don't run into a lot of areas in dungeons that can't be filled with a near area kabloom.
And it affects everybody. There's no level restriction.
Right. It's just, and you're just stuck. I think the issue we ran into, to go back to the many webs had been cast room with lots of people, was people walking up to the edge of the web and then attacking the thing in the web. Does that affect them?
Right.
And there had been some shenanigans by the players, imagine that, of maybe taking advantage.
I had been cajoled.
Yeah, I think there was
there was some cajoling.
I think there was. There undeniably was, and I am smirking because I know my fellow players at that table where I was a player and was like, "Oh man, they're bending here," but it
all comes back though. It all comes back.
It sure does, and it came back on these guys. I mean, at the end of the day, the mummies apparently did very well for themselves. As I am intentionally not addressing whether that cliffhanger you gave us solved the problem or not. You're not today's episode is not a TPK episode.
No, they ended up being able to kill the mummies.
Okay,
and it was still close. I mean, look, to kind of get away from spellcasting for just a moment and talk about the encounter, mummies are really, really bad because they have an ability that if they hit you, which they get 3 attacks and they add 8.
Seems likely.
If they hit you, you have to make, each time you get hit, a DC 15 con check, or you go to 0 hit points immediately. And I mean, that is utterly bananas and really bad. And so, the fighter with 40 some odd hit points, it doesn't matter. I mean, for all intents and purposes, one of the mummies did 42 hit points worth of damage. It didn't do it on its rot touch. I think it rolled a 3, failed the con save. And the other component of this, to bring it back to spellcasting, I want to talk about another spell from the other spellcasting core 4 class, which is Bless. Okay, mm-hmm. And this is another spell that constantly comes up. It's funny that that Bless comes up so much. I don't know why.
Okay,
which is a tier 2 priest spell, and it gives a creature you touch a luck token. And you got to be within close. What was beautiful about this session is that for the vast majority of it, we played for 5 hours. For the vast majority of it, they all had luck tokens. They started with a luck token. We have a way that you have to pay for upkeep, and if you pay a little extra money, you get a luck token. It's 50 gold pieces per session. You can buy yourself some luck because you got some fancy accommodations.
Yeah, nice R&R, some pampered downtime buys you a luck token.
And our priest, level 4. Cast and Bless. Everyone used their luck tokens. Everybody got them back once per round, rolling the Bless. Used the luck token to re-roll the Bless roll, and then kept going. And then suddenly, by the end of the session, Bless was gone, and so were the luck tokens. I think there's a time horizon on sessions that this spell specifically solves. The more times you roll, the more instances of potential failure. And so I have sort of settled on like the 4 to 5 hour session being, at least in terms of the 4 to 5 hour session, plus that being the quote unquote adventuring day. That's a pretty good chunk of time that allows for an arc for most spellcasters. I don't know if you've experienced this, but like the arc of the spellcasting in this session felt almost like, it felt like the game was written to produce these results.
Yeah, I've felt that way very much as well. In fact, you and I have talked about that our Sunday sessions with these open tables initially were from noon to 6, and both of us have kind of rolled back to about noon to 5, and that allows enough time, a wiggle on each end. And the spellcasting point of sooner or later, this is great with Bless, your luck's gonna run out, you know, and you're gonna just not have that spell available. And that kind of heuristic, almost that vibe that the casters know they're always on this clock, this session timer, if you will. I want to call out something you and I mechanically figured out pretty quickly, that if you're newer, maybe you're not thinking about this. So those casting checks, right? Of I'm gonna bless everybody. I'm gonna bless everybody. Okay, well that's casting bless. If everybody's out of luck tokens, which they probably aren't, but each time I'm casting bless, if I'm always on initiative, then I'm taking a turn. It
takes your turn that round.
Takes your turn. Yeah. So if you are rolling random encounter checks on a D6, or Matt and I use what we call the crawling clock that we borrowed from Goblin Punch somewhat. Every time they do it, we go, okay, no problem. What does everybody else want to do? Well, that's going on. So-and-so, you have to stay by the priest because they have to touch you to bless you. And okay, and we're just going to move the crawling clock down. And I want to highlight that you called out in this, they kept running into these crawling clock issues and you were just waiting for these persistent mummies. I know they're going to show up. I just had a very similar session the last time I ran. Had a Minotaur encounter in a maze. And I went, well,
what?
I know, it's weird because I thought it up all by myself. It's not a Minotaur in a maze. That sounds amazing. Why hasn't anybody ever done that before? Anyway, the crawling clock, as they were casting and doing things, I went, hey, once we get past the second tick down, the Minotaur is going to launch its attack at them because it knows the way around the maze. And so wham, that's when it showed up. So those casting checks to this point of casting taking time, casting using up instances, you keep rolling those spells, sooner or later they're gonna fizzle. The other thing I want to highlight here and get your thoughts on is there is a little bit of OSR vibes, because when we talked to Kelsey a little while back before the Kickstarter launched, she highlighted that as a Shadowdark thing is about the vibes, right? They're these old school vibes. For me, it's funny that I rolled a cast system where I could, in theory, cast Magic Missile, which I default get advantage on forever. If I'm level, level anything and have a good intelligence modifier, statistically very unlikely to fail casting Magic Missile and just spam cast that for the whole session as much as I want. That sounds very new school power gamey, and yet I find the opposite to be true. And a lot of the online discussion around like, no, like it's too punishing and you need to make sure people get their spells and they can cast them. I'm like, it's funny to me that this roll to cast mechanic, which is very modern in a lot of ways, really highlights those old school vibes. And I think it's that timer. How does any of that land for you?
Yeah, I love roll to cast. You know that I built like an extremely obtuse roll to cast system for 5th edition. I love roll to cast for a couple of reasons. Number one, the unified D20 mechanic, blah, blah, blah. I could go on and on and on about why I think it's cool. What I think in Shadowdark, the vibes speak to is magic. Like what I like about it, and the argument that I've heard, let me kind of lay out a couple of arguments and then I'll both in good faith and also not in good faith answer them. One argument is that like when you run out of spells, you're useless. We have addressed that before. It is functionally less fun to play a wizard who has no spells. Full stop. Totally agree. The wizard is not useless, and you as a player cannot just check out from the game and be like, I'm useless now. That is just functionally not true either. The other thing is that I hear is like, well, if a fighter misses, they don't lose their sword. My response to that is a little bit in bad faith, but it's also like, it's magic, right? Like you said, it's not supposed to be logical. It's fickle. Sometimes the arcane world just gives you the middle finger and it's like, sorry, not today. And that sucks. But on a long enough timeline, like I said, you kind of smooth that curve out the more you play. And I think for one-shots and for convention games especially, and this is something that I'm going to do in my convention game, where you're going to have first-time players come to the table, and, I am worried that their first experience, while statistically unlikely, might be that. And if it's a one-shot and it's not a precedent going forward, I'm very clear about this, I think it's okay to use some of those other mechanics. I will personally be adopting the roll to keep rather than roll to cast system, where you try and cast bless, let's say, or cure wounds, right, as a priest. Well, you get cure wounds off, it casts, and then you roll to see if you keep the spell. So you always get at least one instance of the spell. However, I would never do that in a long-term campaign. I cannot imagine our 8th level wizard just knowing for a fact that her entire list of spells, you're going to be able to cast every single one of these spells at least once per day. I mean, polymorph's on there. You just know for a fact you're going to be able... That's what I love about the spellcasting, is you look at your spell list as a priest or a wizard, and you have to think, this would be a great time to cast polymorph. But, and I love that little feeling in the back of your head that goes, but what if I fail?
You know what spell highlights that maybe better than any other? Light.
Ooh, that, yeah.
Right? The light
Do you
debate.
cast it first or do you cast it last?
Right. Do we save it for when we don't have torches, or do we use it first to know if it's burned up or not and save our torches? Because then we have, and I have watched, we've run, I don't know how many dungeon crawls, because our Sunday sessions are you go to the dungeon and you're in a dungeon, go for 5 to 6 hours with, relatively full tables pretty consistently. Yep. We've been doing this for quite a while now in terms of Shadowdark's lifespan. And I think that debate happens almost every time is, wait, are we, and it's nice that it's now at a binary of like, should I cast light now or are we saving it? And either usually there's somebody who has a strong opinion and says...
It's a table culture thing now, where somebody's like, nope, save it. And, everyone else goes, all right, fine. I don't agree, but you're the wizard.
Right. And I am waiting. Let's talk a little bit. I'm going to hard pivot all of a sudden because I started realizing this thought process around the light spell. You're driving the ship. That's right, I am. And we're hang on tight. We're making a hard left. Utility of spells.
Oh,
Kelsey has not been bashful about talking about the wizard as a area control and a utility caster, that's what that class was designed to do. At time of recording, she is, as we started recording, was mid live stream of designing the necromancer caster class. So, and that I mentioned just because that topic literally came up in that discussion of like, no, the wizard's supposed to be this utility one. That's another thing I love. That's the other side of the roll to cast coin is I'm going to cast light on this rock and chuck the rock down the hall.
Yeah.
If that burned up a spell slot, no freaking way I'm doing that. It's too valuable. I've lost a resource. If I'm just throwing a die at it, why not? We've talked about how rare it is to see wizards with hold portal.
Yeah.
And yet anytime we've ever run a session where one of the wizards has hold portal, it is like the spell of the session.
Hold portal might be my favorite utility spell in the game because it scales enormously, right? Like, because it's a versus spellcasting roll spell, which is a mechanic that I love. I hate web with an undying.
Doesn't it have that same mechanic, Matt?
It does. You know what? I'll leave it there. It has just ruined so many of my encounters. I had a story to tell, Jody, and the players ruined it.
Those players always ruining our stories. But that utility, I think the roll to cast really gives a freedom to let people try those things. And that's also why I also bristle when somebody's like, my wizard's out of spells, they're useless. I'm like, hey, you still have a backpack, right? Is there anything in your backpack? Then I guess you're not useless. Do you have a stick? Yes, you're not useless. Like, we're in a world here where nobody's got superpower abilities, really. The fact that you used to have them and now they have abated due to some dice rolls, again, it's that utility and player creativity. I will say, I almost feel like when we were playing more 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, that people, because of the stricture of the spell casting there, because, I mean, let's be honest, there are some 5e spells that would take up an entire page in the Shadowdark rulebook, and the Shadowdark rulebook pretty consistently drops 4 to 5 spells per page on much smaller pages.
Yeah.
I feel like in that confine, we used to see people going, hey, can I use this spell in this weird way? And I almost feel like I'm not seeing that as much at our tables with Shadowdark, which is a little bit of a head scratcher to me. How does that land for you? What do you think about that?
Well, I have 2 thoughts about this. My first is, let me just say before I go into my thoughts, this is such a great point. I didn't even think to bring this up. My first thought is maybe the permission structure is there such that question doesn't get framed that way. And instead it just gets framed as, I am going to do this thing. Because, like, if you look at Alter Self, right, you magically change your physical form, gaining one feature that modifies your existing anatomy. What I love about Alter Self is that it just empowers the player to make the choice, and then as the GM, you react to the choice. And I think that, the damage spells are very discreet, right? If you cast Acid Arrow, you do 1d6 is a focus spell. We know how focus works. We know how damage works. Boom, solid, whatever. There's maybe some gray area to, like, does it break if you leave far distance? Do you have to see whatever? I'm not going to get into the kind of the nitpicking here, but I think that, a spell like Augury allows you to, it just says what to do, and then it gives the player the opportunity to be creative. And what I always found about 5e spells is they were so prescriptive and they were so wordy and they were so narrowly defined that players had to ask. And that's kind of my second point, is that, like, the more words you have, the more opportunities there are for players to miss something and not read the last sentence of the last paragraph, right? This spell cannot be cast on undead, which appears all the way at the end of the spell, and it's like the spell seems like it would be perfect to cast on undead, and of course that stuff happened a lot and too often, in my opinion. That's my point, is that, like, perhaps there's a permission structure for just using these things creatively. And I think, to carry on, is like my second point is fewer words leads to easier interpretation and more creativity on the part of the players. Do you agree with that, or do you vehemently disagree and would like to debate and have a knockdown, drag out fight?
Definitely the second one. What was the question?
I just realized, like, I've probably said this to you so many times that your eyes just glazed over.
A little bit, but I was trying to think of specific examples, right? That's as you were going through that, I was like, yes, I agree. I mean, I'm being funny. Like, I agree. There's a permission structure, but I'm trying to think of instances where at the table in either system, I have then had that moment of, so we're talking about magic. Let's be magical. Let's do something weird. My wife is a player, has, in all games, whether it's board games or role-playing games, her one of her catchphrases is, I'm going to try this, and then you tell me I can't.
Yeah.
Right? And it's her way of saying, I'd like to try something that's maybe outside of the rules or bending the rules, or I don't know the rule. Like, she also does it that way of, like, I don't know what the actual rule is for this thing. Can I X, Y, and Z? But she'll just go, I'm going to do this. Does it work? And you're like, yeah, yes or no. I know I've had instances where with her that she does that because that's how she approaches most games. I'm trying to think of a specific instance in a Shadowdark game where we had somebody doing something real weird with a spell that was not the intended purpose of a spell?
I can't think of one, and here's my kind of very short reaction is the spells are so powerful you don't have to. Like the whole purpose of old school spells is that they're bonkers, right? And wizards have an almost exponential power curve, right? Where like fighters are fairly linear. So all things equal, the ability to cast wish and all that stuff is always like that's kind of the example people use. Like wizards are just super powerful, and what I think is that their spells are probably more powerful than their level should allow. Like I don't think that a level 1 wizard should be able to cast Charm Person, right? Like it has a level gate, level 2 or less, but like almost every NPC you meet is level 2 or less. A commoner is going to be, of course, level 2 or less. And it lasts for 1d8 days, right? Like you could have just dropped your pitchfork and found out that you had magic and you just go charm somebody, right? I used to be a farmer. Today I am charmer of Steve. And I'm being facetious here. I love that they are more powerful than they probably should. And this is the thing that drew me initially to old school games. And I don't know that I realized it until this very moment, is I looked at the spells and I was like, the fact that the spells are both way too powerful and also extremely specific. Instead of having a conversation about what the spell, using the spell creatively, we have a conversation about what the spell does. So when you charm a person, instead of having a conversation about like, can I use Charm Person in this way? You have a conversation about what the charm effect does to the person. And it's much more kind of on the back end. I don't know. That's how I would answer.
That's actually super interesting paradigm. We're having all kinds of realizations in real time. This is great. So detect magic to that point.
Oh, yes.
That is such an interesting spell, but it also quietly codifies the way the world works in Shadowdark.
Oh, dude. Yes.
So there's a great video, and I will do my best to find it and get it in the show notes. I don't have any idea who it's from on YouTube, but they talk about the implied world of the lore in Shadowdark. And this is prior to Western Reaches being a thing that any of us knew about or thought about. And it'll be fascinating to see what Western Reaches codifies and what it doesn't.
Oh, yeah. No, I know what video you're talking about. That is the implicit world building of Shadowdark, of the Shadowdark core rulebook by Super Geek Mike.
That's the
there
one.
You go.
There's
the
one.
Full
Thank you.
Title.
Hey, all right. Super Geek Mike getting credit where credit is due. But detect magic, and I'm going to go back to I love to talk about the economy of the world. Detect magic is this fascinating spell in all of those reasons of, no, we don't have a debate over what it does and how it works. And because the spell is worded, not only that you detect magic, but if you focus, you discern the general properties of the thing. There is an implication about, oh, well, then it takes time to reveal the magical nature of things. So in a world, in a game system where wizards just know things, there is a spell that tells you there is something they don't know. Yeah. Not without a spell to get it done. Magic doesn't see magic, or magic can see magic, but day-to-day, folks, it's hidden, and it requires this barrier. That really specifically codifies the way people interact with the world of magic in Shadowdark, and I think highlights your point that in their very short wording, they're also really specific. The system isn't asking you to need to bend anything.
No,
because the conversation points are already clearly identified. That's really blowing my mind right now. Well, I am mid-mind blown. So
let me kind of jump in here and just give you an extra kind of added layer, which is, and I want to point out very like from the off here that this is a part of the Cursed Scrolls, so it is per Kelsey optional material. But if you choose to go searching in the Cursed Scrolls, you can find similar things like this. In the forthcoming Cursed Scroll 6, in the preview document, you can see that there's mage spells, which are lawful spells that wizards can learn. There is a spell in there that is a tier 3 spell called Identify. that you have to touch an object and you learn all the magical properties of one item you touch. You cannot cast a spell again until you complete a rest. The reason that I love this specific spell is that it answers a question for me that I feel like is not implicitly answered. And I think this was purposeful, but it is not answered in Detect Magic, which is, does Detect Magic detect curses? And I think both you and I have settled on, no, it does not. Curses are not detectable by Detect Magic. Like, you will, if you focus for 2 rounds, you get its general properties. You know that it'll give you, +2 to attacks, and that it has something that makes you harder to hit, or whatever.
Right. You put it on and start swinging it around and see what happens, right. And then we'll tell you.
Yeah. What I love about Identify is that it codifies that Detect Magic doesn't give you all of the specific information. Now, you can choose to ignore that, of course. Again, Curse Scroll, optional material. But that level of nuance, whether it was a choice that Kelsey made consciously or not, is all over Shadowdark. Mm-hmm. And I think that is why you and I have kind of consistently said, read the monster section of the rulebook, because the same thing is true in there, where you start to kind of learn the implicit and kind of the assumptions that are built into the game, the action economy, and all that.
I want to crowdsource a question I have about this, specifically Detect Magic and the forthcoming or currently available, if you want to just dive in on the Curse Scroll preview material, Identify. How much? How much is that worth? Ooh. Because this says that in a world that is pretty magical, and the Shadowdark world, well, not everybody is a wizard. There's not I never get the vibe of, and the shop on the corner is selling you magic items. It's not that kind of world. No. But there are wizards. If you're in a bigger city, there's wizards around.
And it should be noted that Curse Scroll 6 is the city
right
Curse Scroll.
So how much? Like, right, what do you got to do to get a wizard? I got this item and I want to know what it does. I've set a dollar amount, a gold piece value, if you will, for it. But I actually really want to crowdsource this. Yeah. I would love for people to chime in about how they've been handling it. So if you've hung with us this far and you haven't just been like, these guys are morons, I'm out of here. Thanks. Appreciate that. And also, I genuinely take it to the Discord or wherever, or Facebook or wherever you saw this, and let us know. I want to know how people are adjudicating this dynamic. Or do you just say heck with it? And if you pick up a magic doodad, it says, I am a ring of... You don't know, do you? And off we go. So, all right. I think we have yammered about that as much as I can stand. We should hear from a sponsor and then see what we can deliver out of this.
All right, Jody. The sponsor today. Oh boy, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love it, because this is an episode about spellcasting, and our sponsor today is Mastercast. And we've had Mastercast sponsor the show before. You know about Mastercast, but I want to hear, you took a course. You took a course from Mastercast, which of course is a service that will pair you up with an incredible arcane wizard teacher, somebody who has mastered the arcane, and they will teach you through a series of various videos delivered through Crystal or whatever your service provider gives you. And Jody, I am frothing at the mouth to know, what did you learn, and how are you going to use it maybe to improve the show?
Well, so I just really always thought that perhaps spellcasting wasn't for me, that it was beyond my reach, that maybe there just wasn't any Fey ancestry back in my lineage. But then I figured, as a sponsor of the show, and they gave us a very generous offer, I would try it out. And I don't know how it's going to help the show, but I tell you what, things have never been better at home. Charm Person is not as difficult as you would think it is. The dishes have never been cleaner. The floor's never been shinier, and man, am I well rested. I'll just, it is great. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 1 to 8 days, but Charm Person, it's worth learning. There's some benefits.
Jody, I am so glad to hear it. This is exactly the kind of thing you can expect from Mastercast. They don't teach you just everyday tricks, right? They teach you real core spellcasting techniques like wand control, elemental summoning, and yes, even the highly coveted charm person. And it's not just about learning the spells, it's understanding the magic behind them. You'll gain skills and confidence to cast with precision, focus, and flair. And at Mastercast, you'll be guided, as you were, Jody, through a step-by-step process with exclusive insights from the world's top wizards. So, whether you're a novice wizard like Jody, or you've already mastered a few spells, Mastercast will help you take your magic to the next level. Unlock your potential today. Mastercast. Learn from the masters. Become the master.
All right, let's bring this topic to the light and see what core takeaways, if any, we can give you from our rambling discussion today. Matt, kick us off.
So the first thing I want to say is that spells are super powerful. And this is, I want to reiterate this, that is awesome. It can also be frustrating for GMs who, you don't know how your players are going to interact with the dungeon or the encounter or whatever it is. And sometimes spells can really come out of nowhere. And sometimes players do want to use them creatively. And I just think that knowing that spellcasting is something that is inherently meant to quote unquote break the game. It's supposed to break the physics of the game. It's supposed to break the at higher levels, literally the game world and the narrative completely wide open in some circumstances. I just think leaning into that is way better than pushing back on it, even though I know I have been frustrated before by an errant fireball killing a room full of monsters that I was gleefully going to set upon a group of PCs.
That's maybe why modules have level caps. I'm just saying. All right, my first takeaway is something that I feel almost like is counter to every other instance of every point I'm ever going to make. Give wizards scrolls. Put scrolls to be found in your dungeons and world. Let wizards find scrolls. Give them that utility that they want. Yes, they are going to grab Fireball and Lightning Bolt, probably both. So give them the scrolls to let them do the weird quirky stuff as well. It doesn't have to be all the time, but it's a great mechanic that I think now that I've been playing this for a while is easy to sleep on. And it's something I'm really adopting, and I'm excited to see on the long term how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, scrolls are powerful considering that you can learn spells that are above the tier that you are allowed to know per your level, and you can cast them. My second and final takeaway, Jody, is that I can't let this go. Web!
It's pretty good.
Stop. Don't sleep on web. You actually called out for listeners to give us a little bit of feedback. I want to see if there's any other web haters out there. Where are my web haters at? Because I feel like I'm living in this crazy world of I mean, you also have had web experiences, but I'm living here where I have been. It was Grease in 5th edition, and now it's web in Shadowdark, and it just drives me bonkers. It's ruining my encounters, and I'm going to start using it on the PCs.
Hey, there's the answer. I don't like this. I'm doing it to you.
In all seriousness, I do actually want to hear from folks if web has played a big role, or if their tables see a lot of use of the spell, because it certainly sees a lot of use at ours.
It definitely does. Sleep. We didn't even talk about sleep. How did we not talk about sleep?
There's a level cap. Sleep is totally fine. Web is crazy.
Okay, Jerry Seinfeld, rein it in. All right. Have a plan. My last one. Let's get us out of here before the show never ends. Have a plan for how you're going to rule things like web and detect magic. There are gray areas. It's one of the wonderful things about Shadowdark's rules. There's room for you to make rulings, but maybe have some thoughts about that before you're got mummies storming down the hallway. All right, friends, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in our discussion that you can take into a future game. We're keeping it. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, head on over to the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. Look for links to any materials we referenced in this episode in that thread or in the show notes. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can get at me on the Shadowdark Facebook page, and Matt via the handle SC Matt on Discord. Until next time, have yourself a magical day.
The Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network, and it's produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Chris Schuster, and Master Diaries is an independent production and not affiliated with the Arcade Library LLC. Third Dark RPG is a product of the Arcade Library. Copyright Twabby 3.